remember it like it was yesterday. I was 17 years old. I had $500 to my name and in my pocket. I was traveling halfway across the world. The only people I knew on the other side were one, a man who had seen my last name on a letter, and recognizing its origin, he slotted his business card into this letter. And this letter went into an envelope, and this envelope traveled 5,440 miles to me, bringing me my acceptance letter to college. The other was a friend of a friend, another student, a person I'd exchanged emails with. 10 years earlier, I had left as a young child. 10 years later, I was returning alone. Now on the plane, I really remember this. I was sitting in the middle. A middle-aged man was on my right and an older lady on my left. And I guess the way that I was feeling must have been in my face. For as soon as they learned what my journey was and the fact that I was taking it without a safety net, they doted on me like I was their child. I remember they called the flight attendants for the things they felt that I needed. At one point when I was done with my meal, the lady actually took a napkin and kind of dabbed at my face to get rid of the moisture that was left behind. And it was an international flight, so it got cold at night. And I remember they took a blanket and wrapped me in it, just to make sure that I was okay. And it was something. It was quite something. When we landed at Dulles Airport, I joined the crowds as we moved towards the carousels to get our luggage. And I had these two hard-cased pieces of luggage. And in addition to that, I had a canvas bag. And it wasn't really large, but it had all the shoes I owned in the world. So I took the canvas bag and I slung it on the back of one of the pieces of luggage, and I was dragging it through the airport. And I remember every 5 feet or so, the weight of the bag would drag it to the floor, so I'd have to stop, and I'd readjust, and I'd keep going. And there was just a press of people just moving past me. But I knew two things at that point. One, I had to survive. Two, to do that, I had to weather every storm. I had to jump back into the fight as though I had never been hit. If I could not do that, what would become of me? I looked up the definition of resilience in preparation for this talk, and I found one that really resonated with how I felt as a 17-year-old. Resilience is the ability to bounce back to a normal state of functioning. Kind of like the bamboo tree, right? Anyone familiar with bamboo tree analogies? Bamboo trees are incredibly strong. They're incredibly flexible as well. They can withstand high amounts of pressure for long periods of time, and when the pressure is removed, they swing back to an upright position. Now, I love that idea of bouncing back when the pressure is removed. But what happens when the pressure is not removed? At 17, it wasn't easy adapting to a number of things. Being halfway across the world, not really knowing anybody. Take cultural differences, for instance. I remember in class, we were expected to talk a lot. And coming from where I came from, I never could quite understand that because I felt like I was here, I was in my seat, I was on time, I did the reading. So I couldn't understand why I was being graded on my thoughts, but you adapt, you do what you have to do. I mean, the older and especially where I was coming from, the older you got, the nerdier it was considered to say a lot in class, but, And then I had to learn things quickly. I had to learn how to combine multiple jobs at a time with a full course load because I needed to work to take care of myself. But I had scholarships, and my scholarships were merit-based, so they were dependent on the GPA I ended the semester with. So it was a constant dance, a constant juggle all the time. And I learned the power of the internal drive and how an internal drive can keep you going, no matter how bleak or lofty the situation before you. For me, I've always combined my internal drive with a positive mental image, usually of where I want to be at the end of the struggle. So that meant in college, I went to bed and got up in the morning almost all the time with the same picture of myself in a long, flowy gown. And I always imagined blue or black because I knew they would choose one of those two colors. The cap on my head and a tassel hanging down the side of my face, and I could just hear it. Class of. And we would rise, and I would move that tassel from one side to the other. And I worked hard in college. But I do remember this one class, though, this one class that just got me, calculus. Now, pre-calculus had not been that bad. I mean, I did well enough in the class that my professor actually sent a personalized letter of recommendation to the director of our Learning Resource Center, recommending that I be a tutor, which was great for me because it was one of the higher paying jobs on campus. So I had my ego trip and I wrote it into calculus, and then calculus took it away. I don't know what it was. Maybe I was doing too much at the time. I remember then I was working 2 jobs, one of them off campus. So I would catch the shuttle from our dorm room to the train station. I would ride the train a couple of stops into DC because I was coming from Northern Virginia at the time. And then I'd walk to the office. I'd put in several hours and then turn around at the end of all that, go home tired, and then do homework. Or maybe calculus and I just didn't agree. That's fine. That's fine. I can accept that too. But I remember the quiz in calculus that gave me my very first F. And I remember the teacher called me into her office so we could discuss this. But there was no discussing that. Because as soon as she put that paper on the table and I read my name and I saw that F, I turned around and I ran out of her office. And I did it quickly so she wouldn't see the tears that were beginning to form in my eyes. And I don't know what she thought about me. It was just that for me, the stakes had always been so much higher. But I refused to give up. I refused, even when way more difficult things presented themselves to me. And 3 days before I turned 21 years of age, my mental image became a reality. I crossed that stage with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. Now, that's not the end of the story, of course it's not. My fundamental question is this: what happens when you're working hard at something and you're just not succeeding? If you're not good at running, for instance, and exercise is your goal, you could try any number of things. You could take up kickboxing, kayaking, hula hooping. You could even go up and down the stairs in your home multiple times a day, and it might suffice. But what happens when the thing you're not good at pays your bills and you can't just walk away? Dr. Hans Selye is generally recognized as the father of the stress theory. He defines stress as the body's response to any demand for change. He further describes eustress as the body's response to a positive experience, say the birth of a child or a promotion or a new job. He then defines distress as the body's response to a negative experience, maybe the loss of an income or the loss of a family member. But he found in his research on rats that regardless of the noxious substance with which he injected rats, regardless of the nature of the stressor that he imposed on rats, they had the exact same physiological response: alarm, resistance, exhaustion. So what happens when you can't remove the stressor? As a new graduate at 21, I was excited. I went out and got my very first real job, like thousands of dollars in debt to Sally Mae, but you do what you have to do. And it was supposed to be my dream job. But I hated it. I hated every moment of every minute of every hour. And this is exaggeration on my part, of course. It wasn't really that, it wasn't this bad. It just wasn't good either, The first 9 months, I used the sophisticated knowledge of organic chemistry that I acquired by burning the candle on both ends. I used it to do dishes in the lab. At the end of the 9 months, I was laid off. And maybe for someone else, that could have been a blessing in disguise, a chance to recalibrate. For me, I had no safety net, so I took the next job that came my way. And you've all heard about the curse of experience, right? How you need experience to get experience, which is why we do internships. Then once you have experience in a field, no one ever believes you can be in a different field. So unsurprisingly, I ended up in another lab. And I worked hard there as well. But the harder I worked, the more my experiments tanked. And we used to joke about it in the lab. We would say it was the machines. The machines were out to get us. And I think for my coworkers, it was a joke, but for me, I was serious. I mean, it had to be the machines. There was just no other explanation. apart from, the obvious. But I mean, I really do have a lot of respect for people who do this kind of research, because our lives would look very different and not in a positive way without them. But I return to my original question. What happens when you cannot remove the stressor? See, I was burdened down like the bamboo tree. I was stuck in a job I thought I wanted, but now for almost 4 years, I was desperately trying to escape. I had blown way past alarm, way past resistance, and I was living in exhaustion. Unsurprisingly, it was exhausting. I gave myself a second job. At the end of the day, I would come home and I'd send as many applications and resumes as I could into the field I wanted to be in, and months and months and months, and just nothing happened. So I desperately needed to do something to shine a light into my dark places. So I wrote. I've always loved fiction, and before that, I tried really, really hard to write something that was worth something, and I had not succeeded. Ironically, it was in those dark moments that the words came. And then the words became ideas, and the ideas became chapters, and the chapters became a book. And the exhaustion didn't feel so bad anymore. See, I was living under the pressure, and I was begging my situation to change, but it refused to change. So I had to change. If we think of stress as a wound, we know that wounds heal, right? But did you know that wounds heal differently? And that the process of wound healing is determined by several factors, like how much blood the area gets, or like whether or not the area undergoes continued stress in the form of repeated trauma or of an infection. So if we think about stress then in that way, and we think about chronic stress, and chronic stress as being continued injury to a wound, like living with a chronic illness, for instance. 45% of Americans live with at least one chronic illness. 46% of people around the world. That's almost 1 in 2. So if it's not you, the person sitting next to you, or mental illness, 1 in 5 Americans, 1 in 7 around the world. Just be kind makes more sense. What if it is the continued stress of running a household, of raising children, of caring for elderly parents, of building a company or a business, of nurturing an idea or a dream that hasn't taken off yet? And as much as we do to try to nurture our souls, we find ourselves living in exhaustion, dancing in the rain till we cannot dance anymore. See, I'm presently pursuing 2 doctoral degrees, one to become a physician, the MD, and the PhD in public health. And sometimes it is exhausting dancing in the rain. But we can't give up either. We've given too much, we've sacrificed too much, and we've worked too hard. See, on this journey we call life, as long as we have breath in our nostrils, our stories are never over. If the rain insists on falling, we can bring an umbrella. We can bring an umbrella for the rain that falls longer than we want it to and lasts longer than we think we can hold on. We can bring an umbrella. And we can bring multiple umbrellas if we must. One for the showers, one for the downpours, and one for the torrents. And we can make this our new normal. We can define our resilience as this. See, the place I'm talking about is the middle, where stress wears us down, but resilience sustains us. If you take an axe to a tree, the axe may forget. The tree, though, the tree never forgets. It is in this place that we can feed our souls, that we can change our mental images multiple times a day if we must, that we can give ourselves room to mourn when the rain lasts too long, and we can be kind to ourselves as we find the strength to rise again. And there's power in this place because we find ourselves there longer than we want to a lot of times. We can respect our journeys. We are all resilient, even in this very moment. You have sat listening to me for the last 12 minutes. And yes to your question, yes, I am shamelessly displaying my son's artwork, yes. And depending on who you are and what you're thinking about in the moment, our eyes all land at a different point first. If you don't believe me, ask your neighbor at the end of this. If you have kids or you work with kids, you might see the handprints right away. I see the teacher's fearless attempt to make that look like something. We are all resilient in different ways. So don't worry about whether your resilience looks like someone else's or whether it feels like the same kind of resilience you had in your last struggle. Find your internal drive and push on. And bring an umbrella. You'll make it to the other side. Thank you.